Well, here in Revelations 14, we're going to see some really interesting lessons that the people in the first century of Christianity would have learned a little different than us from this section, but some really good lessons for us to learn as well as we see this in our day and age, possibly in our near future coming to pass. So let's get started here with chapter 14. Now, I want to read something from Greg Koster's book, Revelation, that helps us to put some context to this chapter, basically. He said, the promises and warnings in this section presumably would have affected early readers of Revelation in different ways. For those confronted by pressure to compromise their loyalty to the Lamb, the visions offer encouragement to persevere, knowing that God will not abandon them. But for those who do not see making peace with the religious and commercial practices of the ruling power as a problem, the specter of judgment is a warning to change course. Rhetorically, the promise of salvation and the warning of judgment function differently, but they serve the same end, which is that readers exhibit the faithful endurance of the saints. So really good way that Greg phrased that as far as helping us to think through those who want to follow Christ are probably going to see some good things in this. Those who aren't following Christ aren't going to be happy about this chapter. So let's jump in verse 1. And I looked, and lo, a lamb stood on the Mount Sion, and with him 144,000, having his father's name written in their foreheads. Now let's just look at this verse for a second here and kind of pull this apart a little bit. So we've talked about in the past the some of the things that are coming together here. We talked about the 144,000. I believe that was the last video. We've talked about the two beasts. Remember, there's one that came out of the ocean, so from below sea level up to sea level. There's one that came out of the ground near there, so near sea level. They were there with the dragon. Now we have a lamb who's standing on a mount. So if you think about this, if you were to see this play out, okay, we would see the lamb is at a much higher elevation than the others. Now, if you think about this from the era of the first century and geographically the area of Jerusalem, we would see if the ocean or the water that Leviathan, that the beast came out of, was like the Dead Sea or the Sea of Galilee area, then it would be below sea level, that they were there, and then the mount would be up higher. But either way we look at it, the mount is still higher. So the lamb is higher up in elevation than the evil beast, basically. Now what's interesting is it says here, having his father's name. So this is the father of the lamb. This is God, and lamb is Jesus, and Jesus' dad is God. Now, this is going to be a bit of an interesting thing to think about from a Trinitarian point of view, because again, Trinitarians would see God and Jesus are technically the same entity, the same being, but different roles. And so now we're seeing in here, there's a separation of these roles. The lamb is standing on the mount. So this would be like, either we could imagine a lamb itself standing on the mount as a symbolism, but we could also think of Jesus there, and then his father's name written in their forehead. So the name of God is written in their forehead. Some people would say that's Elohim. It might be. But this is really interesting that from a Trinitarian, there's God, and then there's the Son. And they in the chapter, they're delineated out. Now, if you're non-Trinitarian, you'd think clearly that means they're two separate people. But Trinitarians would say, no, they're technically not separate people. They are the same, but they manifest differently. So let's see. So if we compare this with the last chapter about the beasts, this is we're going to see some comparisons to we learned about the beasts, their false power. They act like God. They pretend to be God. They even, if you remember, the beast had the forehead, had the words of God on their forehead, the blasphemy. So this is 144,000 people with the name of God written in their forehead. So this isn't the lamb having it written on him. This isn't the lamb trying to prove he is truth. He is powerful. This is the Lamb leading people who are following God. So it's not about the Lamb promoting his own power. It's the power of God that is helping guide these people, basically, rather than try to make try to make the power to themselves. So there's this contrast. The beast has the names of God on its forehead by itself, not its followers. Its followers have the mark of the beast. The beast has the names of God. The beast is trying to make himself look like God. The Lamb's not trying to make himself look like God. The 144,000 people who are not the Lamb, but these are the Lamb's followers, have the name of God, not the name of the Lamb necessarily. Now, verse 2, and I heard a voice from heaven as the voice of many waters, and as the voice of a great thunder. And I heard the voice of harpers harping with their harps. It sounds like a sentence that was written by Dr. Seuss there. Harpers harping with their harps. So there, if you think about this, okay, a voice from heaven. So that means John is on earth, on this land. Okay, and there's as a voice of many waters, so similar sounds introduced at the opening of the exalted Jesus as well. If you remember, thunder accompanied visions of God's thrones and actions as well. So the voice of many waters is the voice of great thunder. So this is like the voice of God, messages directly from heaven. Verse 3, and they sung, as it were, a new song. So this is, okay, so let me think about this for a second. Let me clarify verse 2. A voice from heaven, as the voice of many waters, and as the voice of great thunder. So there is a singular voice from heaven that is sounding loud and very broad and amazing. And I heard the voice of harpers harping with their harps. So there are people, there's this big, loud voice from heaven, and there's lots of people who are like minstrels who are singing as well. So I want to make sure that distinction in verse 2. Verse 3, and they, the harpers who are harping with their harps, sung as it were a new song before the throne and before the four beasts and the elders. So Isaiah recorded the singing of the new song after he recorded the restoration of the gospel. The song is unique in that only those who are sanctified are worthy to sing it. The same spirit is reflected in Doctrine and Covenants section 84. In fact, there's more about the new song there as well. In another instance, the song is simply called the Song of the Lamb in D&C 133. So let's look at this. Here's the song. This is a song, and no man could learn that song but the 144,000 which were redeemed from the earth. So the 144,000, these priests that are going to go forward know this song. But it says that nobody else could know this song but them. So that's really interesting. So it doesn't mean like, hey, only these people could learn the song, because like in section 84, we have the lyrics to a song. It's to be sung in the last days. And we've heard this talk about before, these songs that have been sung or will be sung. So this is probably a song being sung that only they know what they're saying. So maybe they're singing in a language or in a symbolic manner that is hard to understand, but those people who are redeemed, the 144,000 basically. Verse 4, these are they which are not defiled with women, for they are virgins. So this is describing the 144,000. These are they which follow the Lamb whithersoever he goeth. These were redeemed from among men, being the first fruits unto God and to the Lamb. And in their mouth was found no guile, for they are without fault before the throne of God. These guys have a pretty good, they're pretty good people. These 144,000. It sounds like they are men. These 144,000 are men. Now, what's interesting is let's kind of dissect verse 4 and verse 5 here. So these are they which are not defiled with women. This is something that Greg Koester made a comment on in his book. He says defilement can occur through contact with something unclean or through sinful actions such as immorality, adultery, theft, idolatry, and murder. Defilement makes a person unfit to enter a holy place where the company of holy people. Nothing unclean is brought into New Jerusalem. Revelation does not assume that women are inherently unclean, since images of a woman giving birth and a woman at her wedding banquet are used in positive ways for the people of God, and New Jerusalem is pictured as a bride. Rather, Revelation uses marital imagery in a positive way and links defilement to behaviors that violate the marriage relationship. On one level, the writer lists impurity along with sexual immorality. On another level, he transfers connotations from illicit sexual relations to unfaithfulness toward God when using adultery, immorality, and prostitution metaphorically, as is the case here. An approach which draws on gender and post-colonial studies proposes that the imagery counters imperial ideals of masculinity. Depicting the faithful as those who have not filed themselves with women is considered misogynistic, yet identifying them as virgins gives the males a feminine quality, since virginity was regularly prescribed to women, not men. The dominant Roman discourse emphasized that real men married, fathered children, and were the heads of their households. They were sexually dominant. Although Revelation is seen as androcentric, picturing Jesus' followers as male versions, fits the book's anti-imperialism by challenging models of masculinity associated with the empire. So if we think about this as, again, in Roman times, it was like important for men to be sexually dominant, to be a father of children, to be a husband, to be the leader, the dominator in his house. To have a house, he needs a wife and he needs kids. So he's reliant on the wife to have a house, but he's supposed to be dominating over him. That's where they put their focus at the time. So this is kind of going against that, saying, well, look, this is a person who most likely is a man who hasn't had inappropriate, intimate relations with a woman, and they are virgins. So they pointed out from two different directions here. Not defiled, but also virgins. So celibacy. This is a common idea, in fact, used with the last days, celibacy. So these are they which follow the Lamb whithersoever he goeth. Now this is not meant to say these are male virgins, but they would have female qualities. So in John's day, this would be like, oh, these are different, very different than traditional Roman values, different than the culture, basically. But the idea of male virgins was not a common idea of the times. It was something that developed later. A male virgin was an oxymoron in Roman days. That didn't make any sense at all. But this is, in a way, giving men feminine virtues. So these are men who are in touch with their feminine side, if you want to think about it that way, who are thinking more like women, who are understanding things in a more ways that women would understand things. So some really interesting contrasts. Men that are acting or behaving in a way like women type ideas. Not acting feminine, but realizing that there are important qualities to that women exude that men should adopt and work on themselves. So I think that's just really interesting way to look at this. Now, let's talk here. Koester makes another comment here. He says another translation on these is, now these who follow the Lamb wherever he goes are maidens. So when that second line, they follow the Lamb wherever he goeth, they are maidens. So that's following the Lamb around would be what a woman's job would be. Maidens or virgins is a collective image for Zion and Israel, as well as for Christians who are pure in their devotion to Christ. Just as young women are to be singularly committed to their patrol, I think that was a misspelling there, basically to their fathers. Since virginity was expected of young women approaching marriage, Revelation uses it as a metaphor for Christians who refrain from idolatry and other unfaithful practices, for they are well suited to be the bride of the Lamb. So this verse, if you really think about this verse is talking about people who, it's using that metaphor from Isaiah of the bride. The idea of being the bride prepared to marry the bridegroom, to be with Jesus, to take upon you his name, to be a part of his family, his household. That's what this is really talking about. So these aren't necessarily virgin men who are in touch with their feminine side, in a literal sense. These are more of people, probably most likely men, who are uh, prepared and ready to receive the Savior in their life and to be fully involved in his work and his efforts in doing things. Which does mean, again, in order for us to really understand our relationship with Christ, we need to think in more feminine terms. So never discount the opinion of women, honestly, especially in church opportunities, because the scriptures point out here in Revelations, it's over in Isaiah a lot, it's in some of the New Testament scriptures as well, that God references us, our relationship between Jesus and us, as we are the bride, we are the women. So guys, you need to get out of your thinking. You need to start to understand that women have a very important role to play, even if it's metaphorically here. They have natural dispositions that men need to learn how to work with and to adopt. So I think it is important for men to realize you need to think a little more like a woman to be able to come closer to Christ. I mean, we see this as a major theme in all these scriptures. So we want to look at be careful with this. Now, if we look at this last line here, these were redeemed from among men, being the first fruits unto God and to the Lamb. So another translation where it says these were redeemed from among men can be they were purchased from humankind. Now, when we think of being purchased from humankind, in the first century AD as well as in Old Testament times, this is a marriage covenant. Being purchased. When a man wanted to get married, he would go to the woman's father and negotiate a price to pay. He would pay that price to the father so that he could take the father's property, aka his daughter, to be his property, aka his wife. That's what this is talking about. So again, more bride imagery in this verse. In fact, some manuscripts read from the beginning, meaning the people who are in the book of life from the foundation of the world. When it talks about first fruits, these are the people being the people from the beginning unto God and to the Lamb. Now, so that's, again, people who are in the book of life, thinking of that first fruits. Now, this last section here, first fruits unto God and to the Lamb. John shifts to feminine imagery for the redeemed, calling them maidens who follow the Lamb. Maidens are young women of marriageable age who have not had sexual relations. Portraying the redeemed as chaste males in verse 4 indicates that they resist the idolatry and sin associated with a whore, but depicting them as chaste females in the latter half of this verse shows that they are prepared to be the bride of the Lamb. Their purity consists of righteous deeds. The shift from masculine to feminine imagery is as abrupt as saying that the redeemed number 144,000 and yet are numberless, or that they are pure because they wash in blood. When John says that the redeemed follow the Lamb wherever he goes, the language recalls how Israel was pictured as a bride following God into the wilderness, adding that the redeemed do not lie also fits this theme, since deception belongs to the allies of the beast but has no place in New Jerusalem, the bride. Finally, the redeemed are unblemished or blameless as he fits a young woman anticipating her wedding day. The basis of the metaphor are the practices of betrothal that were common among Jews, Greeks, and Romans. At the time of betrothal, promises united a couple in an exclusive relationship that was tantamount to marriage. The couple would not actually live together until the wedding day, when the bride was taken to her bridegroom's home. Until that time, the young woman was expected to remain chaste. Faith binds the people to Jesus, the Lamb, as much as a betrothed bride is bound to her bridegroom by solemn commitments. At the present time, believers do not live with the Lamb in the fullness sense, but await the wedding when they will be raised to life in New Jerusalem. There, the Lamb and his bride will share the same dwelling. During this period of betrothal, though, Jesus' followers are to remain chaste by refusing to yield to pressures that would violate their commitment to him. In any ordinary sense, a major violation of control was sexual infidelity. When transferred to discipleship, the notion of immorality means that Jesus' followers are to resist false worship and the wrongful actions associated with it. So I hope you start to see this important role of how much women play in the gospel. Even metaphorically, there's some powerful examples and opportunities here. And understand that we need to approach Christ as if we are a bride getting ready for her wedding. So guys, you need to think different. You need to understand, what does that mean for a woman to be a bride, to be getting ready to prepare herself and to make sure she is ready to give herself to her husband. And you need to think that way about your life. So again, you need to learn from the feminine perspective how to better your life to come to Christ more. There is such an important role in this. And I love that this is here. When you go back to the second half of Isaiah, the videos I did for that, and some of the other ones about the bride, we're going to talk a little bit more in Revelations about this as well later on. We've already done a little bit of discussion on it, and there's a few of the lesser epistles in the New Testament that talk about it as well. So some great things to see this metaphor, this importance that women play in here. I hope you can see that and realize how important that is. Now, it's interesting that it talks about the first half of verse 4 is being clean. The second half of verse 4 is being redeemed or sanctified. So, washed and sanctified. If you're familiar with temples, there is a process in verse 4 of moving away from the world and moving towards God. The temple's baptism helps you move away from world cleansing, washings, and then when you are anointed, after you've been cleaned, you are anointed and prepared, sanctified to work with God, come closer to God. And we can see that process here in how he's phrased things in verse 4 as well. So there's definitely some temple connections into this if you think of initiatories, washings, and anointings. Now let's move on to verse 5. So this is still talking about this 144,000. In their mouth was found no guile. So there's honesty and integrity in these people. For they are without fault before the throne of God, which means, now we could look at that and say they're without fault because they never made a mistake. But because these were taken from among men, they are human, that most likely they have repented of their sins. And they've been cleansed and washed away. Therefore, God does not remember them anymore. Therefore, it's as if they never committed it. So most likely these are people who have repented, who have gone through those processes to be better. So let's go into verse 6 and continue on now. And I saw another angel fly in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach unto them that dwell on the earth, and to every nation and kindred and tongue and people. So this is like a different vision. So we saw this one where the Lamb is up on the mountain, up on the mount with the 144,000, and we understand who are these 144,000, what are qualities and traits and ideas about them, which tells us how we should act to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. And now in verse 6, we're getting another vision, where he's seeing an angel fly in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach unto them that dwell on the earth, and to every nation and kindred, tongue, and people. So there is a gospel message that needs to go out to everybody in the world, basically on earth, in mortality. Section 133, for if you're LDS, you go read section 133, verses 36 through 39 to see partial fulfillment of this in the restoration. Verse 7, saying with a loud voice, so this is the message this angel is promoting, fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment is come, and worship him that made heaven and earth and the sea and the fountains of the waters. So that's the statement that this angel that's carrying this message of the gospel has told people. This is what he's messaging. So let's look at this. Fear God. Now, in an initial sense, when we think of fearing God, we think of being afraid, like at a haunted house or watching a scary movie or something like that, where we have fear and afraid. And it's not that we should fear God like we are going into a haunted house or something. Fearing God, oftentimes, especially in the scriptures time, is meaning respect God. So fearing God doesn't mean you're like afraid of him, like you'd be afraid of a wasp or a spider or something like that. This is about having respect for God, acknowledging he has power, he has his authority, he is mighty and amazing and wonderful, and we should show him that respect. And they give him glory. And this is now it's talking about this angel saying, for the hour of his judgment is come. Now sometimes some believers think that this means that the time for teaching the gospel is done and that destruction will soon follow. The hour of his judgment is come, meaning we're done teaching the gospel, it's time for the judgments to happen, basically. People who want to repent will be compelled by destruction to repent. That is one way you could look at this. The preaching is done. It's time for judgment day after the preaching. People have had the chance to repent, and now their window of opportunity is closing as judgments start to take over. That could be one way that you could see this. Now, what's interesting is it says, and come and worship him that made the heaven and the earth, the sea and the fountains of the waters. So where this angel's message is referencing, come worship the God of creation, not the God of one specific thing. Like back in these days and age, a lot of the pagan beliefs were there was a God for each element, a God for each action or behavior and things. So they had many gods because only one God could do one thing, and then you had to have a different God for everything else. But in Judaism, one God did all of it, the God of all creation. So this is what they're pointing at here. The beasts rise up as if they were created from the earth, but they are false. Remember the two beasts we talked about last chapter, or unnatural creations of Satan, not natural creations of God. Satan is taking God's creations and twisting them to his own use. He is destroying the natural order of things. So if you remember, those beasts, one rose up out of the ground, one rose up out of the water, but those are not God's creations. That is Satan trying to take the elements that God has put in place and using them for his nefarious purpose, making it look like it's God's, but it really isn't. But God is the real creator. Our Heavenly Father is the one that's created everything, and he controls it. He's the one that has the real power. Verse 8, and there followed another angel. So after that first angel, now there's a second angel coming across, saying, Babylon is fallen, that great city, because she made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. So often this is thought of Babylon as a symbol of a city. Now there used to be an ancient nation named Babylon, a city named Babylon, or Babel, that has been around, but metaphorically we use the term Babylon to talk about the wicked world, just like we use sometimes the term Egypt has been used in the scriptures to talk about the wicked world. Babylon is a very common one to think about, and from a standpoint of Jewish history, Babylon makes a lot of sense, because in Jewish history, Babylon destroyed Jerusalem and the Jews. I mean, that's the end of the first temple period with Babylon and the 70-year exile into Babylon from the Jews. It's so the figure of Babylon as a wicked city, as the enemies of the righteous, is a common thing that would be understood in John's day. And still to this day, we think about the idea of Babylon has fallen, the wickedness of the world. This, we can think of it as a concept of any country, any city, any society could be Babylon today if they follow the principles of Babylon, of following wickedness and those things like we talked about in the last chapter. The philosophy of Babylon has fallen, the great city, because she made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. So if we look at this, this is interesting because now we're seeing Babylon is a she. So we have the bride who's prepared, honest, has integrity, morality, everything, and now a woman who has committed fornications is the wicked one. So we're seeing this contrast of feminine qualities here, basically. She made all nations drink of the wrath or the passionate immorality or the idolatry, basically. Lots of idolatry here. So section 88 verses 94 and 105 claim to be some partial fulfillment, in fact, of this verse here in Revelations. The imagery is of a prostitute having a banquet where she encouraged her guests to get drunk and while she lures them into sexual liaisons. That's what this is really getting at here in verse 8. So huge contrast. A virtuous woman that we should all emulate and be like, and a idolatrous woman who we should not be like. So there's a huge contrast. So I think for women, I think there's a clear contrast in this chapter of qualities and attributes and things to think about. And I think for men too, we need to think more about that and realize the other layer is, guys, do not discount a woman's perspective. I mean, God's using them to teach us how to do things right in our life. Maybe there's wisdom in how women think. Listen to them, pay attention to them. So we see that again play out here in verse 8. Now, verse 9, a third angel, so this is angel number 3, followed the other two, saying with a loud voice, if any man worship the beast and his image and receive his mark in his forehead or in his hand, the same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out without mixture into the cup of his indignation. And he shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. So I'm going to pause right there before we go. Let me read verse 11, actually. This is the end here. Then the smoke of their torment ascendeth up forever and ever, and they have no rest day or night, who worship the beast in his image, and whosoever receiveth the mark of his name. So let's look at this, okay? This third angel is warning, basically, of if you get into idolatry, if you follow that idolatrous woman, if you succumb to the worldly ideas, to Babylon, so if you worship the beast, basically, so you've got this going after the false religion, and you receive the mark on the forehead, so the 666 idea we talked about last chapter, or in his hand, the same shall drink the wine of the wrath of God. Now, when we think about this, we need to understand that what he's talking about is not fun. The drinking the cup of the wrath of God means destruction. And it's going to be poured out without mixture into the cup of his indignation. So this is basically very passionate anger that God is going to have. You have disobeyed my commandments. I've tried to help you, and you resist my attempts to help you. Therefore, judgment is given to you. And that's what's going to be happening. And what is going to be like? Tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels, in the presence of the Lamb. This is not going to go well. So we think about the idea of paying the price for their own sins because they're not covered by the atonement. There's going to be, we can think of this idea of the spirit prison and outer darkness of these people. It's not going to be good. So not going to be good at all for these people. The smoke of their torment ascendeth up forever and ever, meaning non-stop torment. They have no rest day nor night, who worship the beast in his image, and whosoever receiveth the mark on his name. So the third angel completes this sequence by disclosing the terrible consequences of worshiping the beast. The beast devotees drink the wine of divine wrath and are eternally tormented with fire and sulfur in the presence of the angels and the Lamb. This gruesome scene is to some extent traditional, but one might ask whether it describes to God a brutality that might be better suited to the beast. In disregard, it is significant to remember that Revelation works with the idea of symmetry and judgment. The beast uses violence against the innocent, which is unjust, whereas God makes the perpetrators suffer the consequences of their own destructive tendencies. Symmetry is evident in the metaphor of wine. Since Babylon, the whore, has made the nations drink the wine of her passionate immorality, she ultimately drinks the wine of God's passionate anger. The wine of Babylon's passionate immorality is the seductive quality of consumptuous consumption and violence, which the nations imbibe. The vision of Babylon will show how those who use violence against others become the victims of violence, and how a society devoted to consumption is eventually consumed. When these practices ruin those who do them, they function as the wine of divine wrath. That's Greg Koester in his book Revelations. So a nation that goes after war will be destroyed by war. A nation that goes after economics, like consumption, will be destroyed by consumption. That's what they're talking about here. A nation that goes after immorality will be destroyed by immorality. There's this karma in the symmetry that we can see here in what John is talking about. So it's not going to be fun. It's going to be a bad situation for those who follow the beast, which is in contrast of those who follow the Lamb of God. So it's interesting because those who follow the beast will have a better mortal experience, but a horrible spiritual experience after. Those who follow God will have a hard mortal experience because they'll be persecuted and hated, and they'll be kicked out and not seen as popular and those things. But they will have a better spiritual experience after mortality because God will be there with them. Verse 12. Let's talk about the saints side of this. Here is the patience of the saints. We've heard that before. Here are they that keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. And remember, last time we talked about patience of saints, it could also be translated as endurance of saints. And verse 13, and I heard a voice from heaven saying unto me, Write, blessed are the dead which die in the Lord from henceforth. Yea, the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, and their works do follow them. So even the righteous might suffer and die during calamities and problems. Just because you are righteous doesn't mean you'll have an easy life. It doesn't mean God suddenly blesses you with abundance and prosperity and everything is hunky-dory. It means you're going to have challenges. The world will hate you because you are different than the rest of the world. The point is not to survive the calamities, but be ready to meet God with a clear conscience. So whether you live through it all or you don't, meet God with a clear conscience. Always have that as your number one priority. Number two priority is survive. But number one is, no matter what happens, I'm going to make sure that my conscience is clear with God. Now, these are thought of, if you think about this is really interesting because blessed are the dead. Now, we're going to see that word blessed in a few other verses as well. This is known, in some scholars will call this the Beatitudes of Revelation. There's these several things that, hey, those who follow these attributes and traits are going to be the ones that God takes care of, basically. And we're going to see 7 of them as we go through this. So I think they go into this chapter and into the next one as well. So verse 13 is the first. Blessed are the dead which die in the Lord from henceforth. Because why? They may rest from their labors, and their works do follow them. So they're going to rest from the toils and challenges of mortality, and the good they did in mortality is going to bless them and help them in the next life. Verse 14, and I looked, and behold, a white cloud. So now we've gone past the three angels' visions. Now this is another vision of a white cloud, and upon the cloud one sat like unto the Son of Man, having on his head a golden crown, and in his hand a sharp sickle. So now clouds commonly are used in ancient languages as signs of divine agency. So one that is on a cloud, the cloud would show divine agency given to that person. One is like unto the Son of Man. If you notice, man is lowercased. We're not talking about a specific man, but man in general. So a human or a human-like person who has on his head a golden crown. Now this is a laurel wreath, the ones that the Olympians would wear. So a symbol of victory, not a symbol of power. And in his hand a sharp sickle. Now, if you're not familiar with these sickles are big. There's some that have a short handle on them, and it's a curved blade because you use this to swipe at the grain to cut them down. The scythe was a bigger one that had two big handles on a long stick, a big blade, usually a couple feet long, that you could just take these big curved swaths and just cut the grain. You'd cut the grain and it would lay it down, and there's a way to like twist it to lay it all out in its line. Then somebody would come along behind you and pick it all up, so they could go in and separate the wheat from the tares and collect the wheat and go through finish their harvesting. So keep this in mind, okay? There is this angel, looks like a human, that is a person that looks like a human sitting on a cloud. So there's divine authority, divine agency there, has a laurel wreath showing victory, and a scythe, basically a big sickle in their hands, okay? Now verse 15, and another angel came out of the temple, crying with a loud voice to him that sat on the cloud. So now we're seeing this angel come out of the temple. Thrust in thy sickle and reap, for the time is come for thee to reap, for the harvest of the earth is ripe. Now, does this mean the previous one was an angel? Maybe. Some people think it could be the idea of Christ coming to reap the earth. Most likely it's more of like an angel, not a destroying angel necessarily, but an angel that is, it's time to reap the harvest. So think of grain. The sickle's cutting the wheat down. Now here's the thing. There's a big metaphor using grain and harvesting in the scriptures. There's a story of the wheat and the tares. Wheat is what you want. You grow wheat because you grind up the wheat berries to make flour, which allows you to make bread products, which you can then eat. Now back then, of course, flour was a high protein thing. Today's wheat is non-protein that's been genetically modified, and so we don't have protein in our wheat much anymore at all. It used to be like, here's what's interesting is when they used to make bread in the 1800s, you could have a sandwich and it would completely fill you up because the bread was protein, the stuff in between the bread was flavor. That's it. Nowadays, the stuff in the middle of the bread's just there to hold the stuff in the middle together as you enjoy the stuff in the middle. The bread's just there to keep it from getting gooey on your hands. So the bread is an afterthought now. Back then, it was the main thought. In fact, it was also called meat a lot of times in the Old Testament because it was thick and hearty and it was full of protein. We don't have that bread anymore today, unfortunately. Well, we do, but you have to look at heirloom wheats and other types of wheat that are non-modified. Some of your spelts and kamuts and dark rye, einkorns and different things like that to look into. They're also low gluten, very low gluten. When they hybridized the wheat and got rid of the protein, they turned into high gluten breads and grains. So if you get the more original wheat, it's low gluten. So if you have a sensitivity or intolerance, look at more heirloom wheat as an opportunity to improve your diet. So this is the thing. Okay, wheat grows. The problem is there's a weed that loves to grow right next to the wheat. The weed looks like wheat. So until it gets to fully mature, you don't know the difference. Now, one thing that does happen is the wheat is designed to grow with larger berries in them, so they're heavier. The tares, which is the fake wheat, grow and they are lighter. The seeds are smaller, and so they're lighter on the air. So when you have a harvest, you cut with the sickle the wheat to the ground. Somebody comes along behind you and picks up what are called the sheaves. They gather it up, bind it, stick it on a wagon, gather it up, bind it, stick it on a wagon. They take this all back to the barn, if you will, or a place of winnowing and doing these things. Oftentimes it would be a place that has a roof over it but open sides to allow the air to flow through. And they would then take this wheat, and sometimes they would chop the heads off the wheat to throw the straw to the side. They can use that. They'd bale it up, throw it in as fodder inside animal pens, like straw and things. And then the wheat, they would basically put it in like a bag, and they would smash it or rub it up to get the wheat berries to separate from the chaff, which is the outside whole fiber hull that's on the outside, the husk. They would separate them out. The tares would do the same thing, and then they would throw this into the air. As they threw all this into the air, the wind would catch the hulls, because they're kind of a cup shape, and push them to the side. And because the tare's seed is small and light, it would follow with it. The heavier wheat berries would drop straight down. And so eventually the wind and this tossing it up would allow the wind to separate the wheat from the tares. You would store the tares, and you would burn, or you'd store the wheat, and burn the tares and get rid of the rest of it, because it's just all junk stuff. That is how harvesting works. That symbology has been used tremendous amount of times throughout Old Testament and New Testament. It's a very common way to think about this. So when we think of harvest time, okay, there's a metaphor. I'm trying to remember where it was in the New Testament. The metaphor was that the ruler was like, the servants were like, hey, we've got a lot of weeds in the field. We need to get these weeds out so they don't ruin the harvest. And the master of the house says, no, let the weeds and the wheat grow together, because in getting rid of the weeds, you're going to pull some of the wheat up. And I want to preserve as much wheat as I can. So we're going to let them both reach full maturity so it's clear to see who is who. And then we'll harvest them and take the wheat and get rid of the tares. So harvesting is a good metaphor for missionary work, doing missionary work, giving people a chance of learning the gospel of Jesus Christ. People have to make the choice themselves, because that's the plan of salvation. The idea that God has is agency. You need to be presented with an opportunity to learn the gospel, and then you're given the choice to accept it or not. That's what the goal of a missionary is to do, is to help people accept the gospel, learn it, understand it, so that they can choose to either accept it or reject it. So that is what this is missionary work. The harvest of the earth is ripe. It's time for missionary work to happen, to separate, to choose out who are going to follow God, the wheat, and who is not going to follow God, the tares. So verse 16, and he that sat on the cloud thrust in his sickle on the earth, and the earth was reaped. That's what's happening. I'd say we're kind of in the middle of a lot of that right now. And another angel came out of the temple, which is in heaven, he also having a sharp sickle. So now here's another angel with a sharp sickle coming out. Okay, so a second harvesting happening. Verse 18, and another angel came out from the altar, which had power over fire, and cried with a loud cry to him that had the sharp sickle, saying, thrust in thy sharp sickle, gather the clusters of the vine of the earth, for her grapes are fully ripe. So now we're not talking, this is interesting that they're now pointing to vineyards, grapes, rather than grain at this point. There's kind of a mix of the metaphor there. But here's what's interesting is he's saying, get the harvest done. I'll take care of the rest. So, and this is not somebody coming out of the temple. This is coming out of the altar where sacrifices are given. Remember, under the altar in John's vision earlier are the people, the martyrs, who have died as well. So in a way, this is judgment on those who killed the martyrs, those who have opposed God, the tares. They are going to be burned and destroyed. Severe heat is talked about in the last days. Fire, in cleansing fire in the last days, are common. So now they're going to cleanse the field, cleanse the weeds out, basically. So now grapes are interesting here at the end of verse 18 too, because they switched now to vines, not wheat. Grapes are used to make wine. In Revelations, the wicked drink wine to get drunk, following the whore of the earth, as well as drink the wine of the wrath of God. So the grapes are ready to be picked. The grapes will go through the press, and they will be prepared to be drunk. The wicked are to be destroyed, basically. Verse 19, and the angel thrust in his sickle into the earth, and he gathered the vine of the earth and cast it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. D&C 88-106 talks about partial explanation of this as well. So again, this is a second gathering. So one gathered the wheat and the tares. The next one's gathering the clusters of grapes to be put in the vat. Now, how they would do this, you'd put them in a big tub. And in the ancient days, you'd get people to stand in there and they'd wash their feet off, or at least rinse them off. And they would stand there and smash the grapes down with their feet to press them, to put them under intense pressure to do that. Nowadays, we put them in a press, we slowly tighten it down, and it just compacts them and presses it, and all the juice comes out. Or in the case of the idea of the atonement, the blood of Christ comes out. But this is judgment against them, basically. So verse 20, and the winepress was trodden without the city, and blood came out of the winepress, even unto the horses' bridles, by the space of 1,600 furlongs. We've got to talk about this for a second here, because again, we're talking about wine, but blood is what is coming out, okay, of the winepress. That's the fluid that we're seeing. How much is it? It tells us in volume here what it is. Even unto the horses' bridles. Now, a bridle is the part of that, the piece that you put in the horse's mouth, the bit, and the leather straps that go around the horse's head so that you can control the horse's head and thus control the direction of the horse. The bridle is usually 4 to 5 feet from the ground. So the flow of blood out of this wine press is 4 to 5 feet high of blood. And it is about 1,600 furlongs. Okay, so this is distance now. So Greg Koester talks about this, and he said in his book, the vision foreshadows the battle in Revelations chapter 19, in which Christ returns to trample the winepress of the wine of the passionate wrath of God the Almighty. The two scenes differ in some details. In chapter 14, an angel reaps with a sickle, and Christ tramples the winepress. In chapter 19, Christ is the only one said to act, and he uses the sword that comes from his mouth rather than a sickle. But through their use of the same winepress imagery for a battle connected to Christ's return, the two visions repeat the same basic message in different forms. This scene, as in chapter 19, and we're going to see that here in about 5 more videos, envisions the end to the injustice that has plagued the world. The river of blood, which flows as high as a horse's bridle, shows the magnitude of the violence that has been done on earth. It reveals why divine justice cannot be delayed indefinitely. As Christ trampled the grapes, the amount of blood that is squeezed out shows how full of brutality the world has become. From this perspective, the question is not, why is God's judgment so severe? Rather, if one sees the earth as a vineyard already filled with blood, the question is like that of the martyrs. Why has God not judged the wicked sooner? Now, this is important because this is a flow of blood that is 4 to 5 feet deep. And when it talks about 1,600 furlongs, that's 184 miles. So imagine a river 184 miles long, 4 to 5 feet deep, that is nothing but blood just flowing out of this wine press. So this is, again, symbolic of the amount of wickedness and destruction that Satan has brought to the earth. This is the world we live in. This is the destruction that's all around us. It's happening all the time. We see it on the news all the time. This is now revealing to us why judgments need to come to the earth. Remember the martyrs that were under the altar that were saying, when are you going to avenge us? And God said, wait a little bit, have some patience. I'm trying to help these people repent. They don't repent. And then judgment comes. And this is showing, this is why the judgment is coming. Because this is the extent of your sin. You haven't repented, therefore it's not covered under the atonement. Judgment is coming for you. That is wild. That is amazing to think about. I'd love to hear your comments on this video and this chapter, what you think about it, any thoughts or ideas that come to your mind as we've gone through this, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. We'll see you then.